Welcome to episode 11 of our COVID-19 Religion and Belief webinar series. Today, Professor Rosalind Hackett from University of Tennessee will chair a panel of distinguished experts from Jordan, Morocco, Nigeria, and South Africa. Together, they will look at how the pandemic has affected freedom of religion and belief within the respective regions. We look forward to their presentations. Now I invite all panelists and participants to answer to a poll that you should see on the screen right now. It will give you and our speakers an idea of our global audience. So thank you for taking a minute. For your information, this webinar is being recorded and live streamed on social media. The recording will be available on our series landing page, where we also publish information about upcoming episodes. And there is a link in the chat. You can type your questions or upvote others' questions at any time using the Q&A tool on the bottom of your screen. Please keep your text short and to the point, making it easier for the moderators to pass them on. If you get disconnected, just use the link you have received when you registered to join back in. Finally, I would like to recognize the sponsoring institutions of this webinar series: the Cambridge Institute on Religion and International Studies, the Center for Religious Studies at Bruno Kessler Foundation, the Center for Justice and Society at Fundação Getúlio Vargas Law School of Rio de Janeiro, the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University Law School, the European Union Office of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and the University of Siena. I will now broadcast the results of the live poll and then the panel over to Professor Hackett. Professor Hackett, the floor is yours.
Rosalind, you're on mute.
Sorry, good day, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar. We have 3 speakers, although we hope that perhaps the 4th will join us. So you should have access to the bios of the speakers. So I will begin by inviting Dr. Khalid Hajji, Faculty of Humanities, Mohammed First University, Oujda, Morocco. Dr. Hajji, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be among you to discuss the important issue that concerns the whole world. It has actually surprised us. It has taken us unawares, although the world was expecting something to happen somehow. I mean, we were living a sort of discontent. I remember the discussions we used to have in the European Parliament and the European Commission, and I felt that there is a big discontent in civilization, as Freud would have called it in the 20th century. So then, surprisingly, a nanovirus came and took us by surprise, and we could not. We're not prepared, and we did not know how to react at first. So Morocco, for instance, is one of the countries of the world where the casualties or the ratings there is the less damage when it comes to the fatalities and the number of deaths, because there was some tough measures that were taken at a very, very, very early stage. It was a tough political decision, and it has yielded some good results. So, because the health system is not that much sophisticated as in Europe or elsewhere, so this is why the Moroccan decision makers, they insisted on taking some tough measures at very, very early stage in order to counteract or to, deal with the danger of the spread of the pandemic. Of course, religion plays an important and vital fundamental role in dealing with the situation and in managing the crisis. First, the king as the leader des croyants, or the leader of people of faith, he took the decision of a lockdown, to ban the flights and to prohibit movement within the country, to separate cities, and to limit the spread of the virus. So the authority is a religious authority because the population has to understand what is happening, and the religious authority plays a major role in explaining what is happening at this particular stage of uncertainty. People were uncertain. They started with humor. If the first week, people started making jokes about coronavirus. It is a sort of exploration. They were exploring this situation, trying to understand what is happening. But then the intervention of the leader of the believers gave a religious explanation, so to say, and orders that are of a religious nature to follow. So the leader of the believers issued a fatwa through the council of ulama, the council of the ulama, or the council of scholars, religious scholars. A fatwa was issued according to which the preservation of life, or life preserving, prevails and comes before anything else. So it was a fatwa issuing that preservation, life preserving, comes first. So it was a fatwa that then, because it was not taken for granted, it was not easy to accept, for instance, the lockdown, closing of the mosques, and so on. You needed the religious fatwa and the religious authority to speak to the people and explain to them that the principle of the finalities of Islam, of religion, is preserving life, or life preserving comes before anything else. So this was the first major step. The first major step in the managing of the crisis. Then the second step was raising funds, or funds raising. Then there was a call upon people by the king, as in his capacity as the leader of the believers. He called upon people to contribute to fundraising. So people they have created a sort of a bank account for the managing of the crisis, and all people started, showed, of course, solidarity and started contributing to the managing of the crisis. So according to a very, very, very long, deeply ingrained tradition in Morocco of showing solidarity, not only during the times of crisis, but from a religious point of view, there are three pillars of religion. The first pillar is, belief in the unknown, in God, then worship or prayer or glorification of God. But the third pillar, which is one of the most important pillars, is to give from that which God gives you, or has given to you. This is the third, giving, not taking. It is a pillar of religion. So this pillar was called upon to explain to people the importance of, contributing to fundraising. And of course, then came the role of religion as a discourse from different, different parts, different people. The religious discourse on social media, for instance, was used to bring some solace to people who are living coronavirus as a crisis, economical crisis for people who have a very low income. Of course, they receive help from this fundraising. They were helped to cope with the new situation. But people were and still are still in need of some spiritual solace or psychological solace. They found it in the ambient religious discourse. So nothing happens without any reason, and God is always, when you trust in God, then everything, God knows the reasons why things happen, and we should draw lessons from what is happening. So people are incited through the dominant religious discourse to count one's blessing and not only one's troubles, But for the first time, we see that there is unity between science and religion. Before there was some sort of ideological debate, there was room for conflict between science and religion. But now, on the contrary, we see that people are indulging in one unity and trying to find, it's when you analyze the discourse, the dominant discourse, you see how men and women of science are speaking a religious language. And on the contrary, religious people are, praying with men of science and encouraging them and so on. It's a marvelous symbiosis. And people, of course, do have more time for contemplation and meditation. And the religious component, religious discourse, is bringing some positive energy to fight against, negative forces and so on. So people are drawing lessons, and we feel that we are now, for instance, Morocco is giving aid and help, is helping 15 African countries to show how important solidarity is with the African continent, not only Europe or the United States or other parts of the world, but the African continent needs help. So Morocco has taken some major, fundamental step in this respect. So he sent help to 15 African countries. It might be modest, but it is very, very significant because it shows that it is necessary to help the African continent in this time of crisis. I think so. The religious discourse has replaced, so to say, the discourse of humor that was trying to explain before certainty, because people were trying to cope with the new situation using humor. We have anecdotes and jokes and so on, but then this humor is progressively replaced by some religious content, religious discourse, which tries to cope with the feeling of uncertainty. And in my opinion, people are coping very well, but provided it does not last too much, because people are growing tired at the same time. It is. Religion is helpful in this respect, but we pray God that this situation does not last forever. If there are questions, I can elaborate on Am I within time? Is it okay?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so if there are questions, I'm available.
Right.
Thank you very much for your.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hajji. That was a very helpful overview of your country, Morocco, and how the responses have progressed. And I think what you said about the symbiosis of scientific interpretations and responses meshing with religious discourse was also important, and also the role of humor. I think that was particularly thought-provoking. So there'll be time for questions to Dr. Hajji later, or you can enter your questions into the Q&A section. But I'd like to move on now to our second speaker, Dr. Ahmed Salisu Garba, who is Dean, Faculty of Law, Bauchi State University in Nigeria. Dr. Garba.
Oh, thank you so much for Professor Hackett. And thank you, Professor Shah, for this wonderful opportunity to talk to the gathering about the situation in Nigeria. So what I want to do first is to talk about how the COVID-19 impacted on religious communities. And first of all, the COVID has forced people to change the method of doing congregational prayers, both Muslims and Christians. You have people this time around praying. In a very limited number. People are not allowed to pray. More than 50 in the mosques and churches. We also have suspension of festivals, religious festivals, and general festivals, all of them, to online worship or e-worship. In churches, we see managers of churches or pastors preaching to their congregation using online platforms. And same thing applies to the mosque we have around. And even during the Ramadan, a lot of Quranic interpretation happen online. A lot of the ulamas who don't even know how to use online platforms have found their way, all because of the COVID-19. And then schools, of course, were closed. So even religious schools, people were kept at home as a result of the COVID-19, so schools were closed. So, that is another impact. And then suspension also of religious pilgrimages. Yeah, just like it affected religious people all over the world. So the same thing happens also in Nigeria. And then, of course, the COVID-19 has brought out some sense of sincerity in people. People suddenly became very generous this time around, distributing, sharing foods, water, and many other good things with their neighbors. It has never happened, with this magnitude before. So it's part of the COVID-19. Another area that the COVID-19 has impacted on religious communities is people suspected to have died of COVID-19, the burial, that is the packaging of dead bodies as provided for under religious doctrines, could not actually be carried out because the packaging of dead bodies or people suspected to have died of COVID-19 are done, at the hospitals by medical professionals. So, people will just receive the dead body and just pray the normal way and allow it to go like that without doing the test. The whole country was locked down. and then with few days to come out and reinforce, that is buying more foods, and then limitation in movement. People, continue to pray at homes and without necessarily going to the mosque and other stuff like that. Specifically, IDP camps, the most interesting thing about the internally displaced camps we have in Nigeria, especially Borno State and Yobe State, the humanitarian services from non-governmental organizations, let me just say all the protocols designed to prevent COVID-19 infection were actually designed to protect staff of this NGOs, not necessarily the ADPs. Things like, and then hand washing constantly, IDP camps, when internally displaced people are queuing up to receive, gifts in terms of food, in terms of money, and other situation when they are not receiving these gifts, the social distancing rules, hand sanitizers, even if they are made available, people don't comply with that. And a possible explanation for that attitude has to do with the division that we have among especially religious leaders, especially among Muslims. Muslims became divided, with one group completely denying the existence of the virus, looking at it as a Western conspiracy designed to exterminate all Muslims. And a lot of people, surprisingly, some ulamas. Now, some ulamas, believed, that the virus exists, and that in line with religious tradition, especially under usul al-fiqh, it is very necessary to preserve life. It is very necessary to abide by rules, brought out, by experts, especially medical professionals. Some of the ulamas advocated this, and of course, they kept on, preaching to their people that you should follow these rules, you should abide by this. It is religiously in order. There is nothing wrong with that. But of course, some people up to today, we are still seeing this effect, of the explanation by some, some group of ulamas. And so the NGOs generally, when they are distributing foods or sharing money to the IDPs, they apply the protocols to protect. So this is very, very wounded in so many ways. Number one, by locking down the whole country, including all the states. Suspension of interstate travels in Nigeria, and then enactment of quarantine rules, to keep people suspected to have been affected, by this virus, for a period of 2 weeks. And then the wearing of face masks anywhere you are going, social distancing rules were all enforced. Government also established mobile courts to try people alleged to have violated or the rules of the scarce resources government was able to provide have been generated in the name. But I don't want to go into that argument. What I can only say is, looking at our population and the scarcity of the resources, and then of course, by way of giving the government benefit of doubt, I want to believe nobody, would want to see his own brother dying. So I can only say that the government tried, but possibly not enough. People are still expecting more. People are just behaving like Oliver Twist. They want more from government. And then, of course, establishment of more testing, COVID-19 testing centers. We don't, in fact, before the COVID-19 pandemic, Nigeria don't have a single testing center. But as we move into the COVID-19 experience, we now have more than 50 COVID-19. And of course, procurement of medical facilities in our hospital, because one thing that we have experienced in the COVID-19 is it has exposed our medical institutions, our schools, and other stuff like that. We thought we have certain things on ground, but when the COVID-19 came, we realized we don't have nothing. It's like we have to start from the beginning. So I want to believe this is one thing that out, even online lectures in schools, for instance, we couldn't do it. The public schools couldn't do it because they were not ready for it. But private institutions have been able to do that because some of them have the way wider to do that. But in public institutions, like my own institutions and many others who've been at home, we've been operating from our different locations. Students are all at home and nobody knows or has any idea when we are resuming. So in all, the one benefit that the one lesson that the COVID-19 has brought is we have now learned or seen the importance of information technology. Very many of us have not been used to using webinars, but the COVID-19 has now brought out this reality. Religious leaders, pastors in trying to manage their churches, imams trying to manage their congregations have now realized the need to use the webinars, Zoom, and many other facilities the online. And then it has also brought out a very factual reality on the need on the government of Nigeria at all levels to upgrade the facilities in our schools. It has exposed the decay in our educational institution and also our hospitals. We don't have ventilators. The COVID-19 has now forced us to acquire more ventilators, and we don't even have people trained to even manage these things. But at least the COVID-19 has brought out this reality, and I want to believe that the government is doing it. It has also created more, we have seen opportunities to create more access for people. Because using the online forms to educate people, it means issues like hostel as a challenge in our public institutions. Already people have begun to now think about hostels. Why do we need hostels? If we can use online platforms, at least, are now working hard to find a way to manage them. Organize a webinar for all vice chancellors in Nigerian universities. That is preparatory, to that. So a lot of discussion is going on what are we going to do. But the issue is there is no way, there is no going back to the old practice. Whether we like it or not, we must adopt at least the information technology to manage the schools. And then one thing that has also brought is patriotism, because the sense of patriotism which we are all expected from people, the COVID-19 so without patriotism, possibly we cannot move forward. Let me stop here and then allow others. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Garba. Unfortunately, your...
Yes, I'm done.
Yes, yes, your line...
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, your line got a little up and down towards the end. So I think we did miss some points, particularly about patriotism and things like that. So perhaps when we have the Q&A, we can be a little bit of a recap, and I do have some questions for you. I mean, Nigeria is such a vast case, and I think you've done a good job in trying to summarize some of the responses and the actions and the areas of sensitivity. So thank you for that. Let's move on to our final speaker, unless Dr. Al-Quda has joined us. I don't know that he has. Our final speaker is Professor Luca David Mosoma, who is the chairperson, Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities in South Africa. David, the floor is yours.
Yes, me. Do you hear me? Hello, do you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am going to do what you have indicated we need to do, namely to talk about the impact of COVID-19 to religious communities. I would not want to talk about extensively about what government has done, because only government can do that. What I'm going to do first is what led to what we call lockdown. First, upon receiving the report from the World Health Organization about the break out of the COVID-19 pandemic, our government activated what we call Disaster Management Act. But before implementing it, government consulted all political parties, and they all came to an agreement about the need to institute lockdown in order to save lives. In other words, lives were preeminently important and prized above everything else. And later, before acting this disaster management, the government consulted the religious leaders, the business leaders, the traditional leaders of a country, the health practitioners, in order to make sure that everybody understands that we are going to go into this thing together. That was the principle behind this, that we are now invaded by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we need to flatten the curve in order to save lives. Now, first and foremost, the religious leaders understood that the role of government is not to violate the religious freedom. It is intended to save lives, because in saving lives, then the religious freedom will continue, cultural rights will continue, linguistic rights will continue. But those will not continue fairly well if people are sick and people are dead. And so there was some kind of solidarity in order to make sure that COVID-19 is attacked and hopefully abated. In this regard, the religious communities, because they have agreed, they then had to suspend their Easter services, which is one of the largest services held in South Africa by Christians. There are a number of huge churches which attract to 10 million at a seat at one go, because that would have been a disaster. So all of those were postponed, were not allowed to take place. When it comes to the Muslims also, they had to sacrifice having their Ramadan month, which is a month of prayer, a month of reflection by that community. And of course, you know that in religious environments, you do have places of weddings. And of course, when they have weddings, they attract large number of people. Of course, government says you can have weddings, but only 50 people must attend. And that was the rule. And of course, when it came to burials, of course, burials were also limited to 50 people. But where the individual died through COVID pandemic, normally there are rituals that are done in the African situation, like washing the body, like making sure the body gets to the home and the corpse sleep in the house. In the morning, they do rituals, go and bury. All of those were prohibited. In some instances, they do have what they call night vigils, where they go and pray the rest of the night before the burial in the morning. All of those were banned. So universities, colleges, all of those, lower primary and high primary schools were all closed. It was complete shutdown of business and everything, restaurants, accommodation. Our borders were also closed. Nobody would fly in, nobody would fly outside, except to rescue South Africans that were far away. Now, because the religious institutions participated here, we also have what we call the traditional practices, such as initiation. Initiation schools take place in winter in some areas and also in summer. We had to make sure that those also are banned. They're not taking place because we're told that in winter, there's a likelihood to have the virus even much more severe. So we had also issues of traditional healing, which are done by traditional practitioners, and all of those were banned in order to allow this particular pandemic to be controlled. We had 4 stages. The first stage of total lockdown was stage number 5. We then moved to stage number 4. And then it's only in stage number 3 that religious institutions, churches, mosques were allowed to open. But because they understood the nature of the virulent of this pandemic, religious institutions have not opened, majority of them, especially those that attract large number of their members. But those they did in solidarity with understanding that what is important is to save lives. But government had said, listen, the religious institution, the religious leaders will then become what they call essential services, providing counseling, providing prayers, and all of that. The government opened that to enable these individuals to continue. On the part of government, because majority of people are impoverished, government decided to make sure that each and every family will receive food parcels. They will receive in some instances where there's no water, they make sure that the tankers are there to make sure that people can wash and make sure that people are clean, are sanitized, and things like that. So our government has been very much hard at work. In fact, we thank them for their ingenuity, for their foresight, because if we had not done that, a number of people would have lost their lives. Now, the emphasis has been to lower the curve, to flatten the curve. We are struggling to do that. Just yesterday, the president tried again to ease a method of doing business by opening up commercial accommodation, restaurants, sitting downs, and things like that. And the warning is that this may also kickstart a spike for even more infections in our country. But what is important is that each and every member of our society has been told everything lies with you. Take care of yourself, make sure that you distance, make sure that you sanitize, make sure that you wash your hands for 20 seconds, make sure that you cover yourself with a mask, your mouth and your nose, because each and every person must take this as their full responsibility. Otherwise, this pandemic is going to wreak havoc in our communities. And so it is important to understand that our government, in the way in which it has acted, by bringing everybody on board, it has mitigated against a loss which would have been catastrophic for South Africa. I thank you for that.
Professor Masoma, thank you very, very much. An excellent overview of South Africa and the importance of the role of the government and the transparency and working with the different stakeholders. Good. So now we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. We have a couple that have appeared in the Q&A. This is a question for Dr. Garba. Perhaps this also might be, could be answered by Dr. Hajji as well. Aziz Abdul Karim is asking whether the Islamic history of fighting pandemics via the prophetic hadith, the incident during the Caliph Umar's regime and the 5 times daily prayer, whether this assisted Muslims in understanding and implementing some of the COVID-19 preventive measures. So perhaps Dr. Garba or Dr. Hajji.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let me answer that. I mean, let me respond to that question. Let me say straight away that it has really assisted. That is Islamic history of managing pandemic and the way how it happened during the time of Caliph Umar. Ulama, majority of the ulamas have used that to provide a very valid explanation on the need for people to stay away and pray at homes, on the need for them to comply with expert opinion and other stuff like that. In Nigeria, for instance, the well-known Islamic body, that is the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs, invited ulamas from different sections of the country, and they issued fatwa. Fatwa is a non-binding legal opinion, and that opinion has really assisted the majority of Muslims in complying with the protocols, provided during the pandemic to prevent affection, and also ultimately for the preservation of lives. So it has really assisted. Of course, there are very few of the ulamas who have provided or disagreed with those positions, but the majority complied. In different mosques, especially Jumat prayer, where you have congregational prayers, the mosques in different streets, you have hand sanitizers in most of the mosques provided. You have water, a lot of water provided for people to wash their hands, and in many instances, soaps have been used. So in a nutshell, it has really helped. Thank you.
Dr. Hajji, would you like to comment? You're mute.
Activer le son.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Of course, people draw on the religious or the prophetic tradition and sayings to find a corroboration of, the justification of withdrawing from social life and from the mosques and so on. Prophetic tradition gives us, or is very, very helpful, because the prophet is said to be one of the first figures in history to have established a quarantine during time of a pandemic or viruses and so on. And of course, this has an impact on the psychology of people, of the Muslims in our society. So it has become something dominant, and it has helped people cope with the situation and accept, especially during the month of Ramadan, to remain home and not go to the mosque, not to celebrate Eid, which is after the end of Ramadan. All these things are very, very, very difficult to accept for a Muslim who is used to this tradition. But alhamdulillah, thanks God, the religious discourse was very helpful in explaining and corroborating the common sense. Common sense and religious discourse are going hand in hand.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Hajji. This is a question to all panelists, and perhaps we could keep it brief so we can answer some of the other questions. We have a question about Israel will probably soon advance the unilateral annexation of the residual parts of the West Bank. How will that impact the Palestinian population in front of the pandemic, since that medical facilities and medicines may not be at an easy disposal to them? How should religious authorities help overcoming this issue? Does anyone want to respond to that?
To provide a general answer to that, or response to that, one thing I have observed generally in the Muslim world of today is whatever comes, if it has to do with a decision to be taken or to give a legal opinion, it depends on where you are coming from. Right now, there are two blocks. You have what Muslims now call the middle groups. That is the people that belong to the intermediary group. They always want to rationalize things and provide answers to what they think is better for the people, even if it goes against the interests of people. And there are literalists, people who don't believe in any compromise. So issues like that, depends on, the people involved in discussions, advising the two groups involved on what to do best. Whatever policy that is on ground, the human life, human dignity, both Muslim are the side of the Arabs and the side of the Israel. These two things, are of importance, and unless the two sides have some understanding of, human dignity, not necessarily religious doctrine, I think we will continue to have problems like that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garba. So there's a question to Dr. Garba and Dr. Masoma. The questioner would like to hear more about the response of the Christian churches to the pandemic. Were they compliant with the rules of the government? Was there much spiritualization of the virus?
Yes. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes. Well, as far as Nigeria is concerned, this is well known in Nigeria. The Christian community, a lot of them have actually complied in three ways. Number one, in terms of providing palliatives to their church members. At least they have done a lot of that, and that is quite, the information is out there. In terms of social distancing rules, hand sanitizers, they have done quite well. Even in Kaduna State, the governor of Kaduna State, Nasiru El-Rufai, at a point had to point this out that he has not had any much problem with the Christian communities in Kaduna State, but most of the problems, the misunderstanding, come from the majority of the Muslims. And I have already explained that they are divided. You have the
Dr. Garba, you're breaking up again. I think
the Wasatiyya group, Wasatiyya, that is people who, can you hear me now?
Yes, but can you wrap up because it slows things down a bit?
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is in Nigeria, for instance, the information is out there. Christian communities and churches have really complied. And I said, Kaduna State governor, even at a point, made this known that in Kaduna State, Christians have complied, but the problem is generally with the majority Muslims. And I said they are divided. You have yes.
Yeah, we heard that. Yeah, okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, let's move to Professor Masoma. Yes, please.
99% of the religious institutions complied. We had exception in 1 or 2 cases where individuals, leaders decided to go and worship. Of course, under lockdown, such people were arrested. For the most part, even those who claim to have the healing gifts complied, because COVID-19 in some instances was seen to be a very virulent, serious disease. So in our situation, we're happy because majority of them really complied under this, because of the consultation that they have gone through with government. Because I indicated government did not want to legislate without the consent of all the parties that are involved. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. We have another question now with regard to Kenya. The Kenyan scenario is much like the Nigerian one. However, the refugees in Kakuma and Dadaab refugee camps in northern Kenya have been barred from travel outside the camps. There is an inter-religious task force in place for easing on the restrictions on worship. Initially, the enforcement of the lockdown was forceful, and various human rights violations were documented by Hackett Africa and other organizations, but have since lessened as the curfew time has been extended. So that leads me to ask you all speakers, what might be some of the lasting effects of COVID-19 with regard to inter-religious relations? Do you think that once we all emerge from this, that this will lead to greater harmony, greater cooperation? Because I'd like to hear perhaps more from some of you about when you talked about how people were cooperating and helping one another. Were they helping one another across the religious lines, including minority religious groups? Who would like to speak to that?
Let me take.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dr. Hajji?
Yes. Well, I speak from. Can you hear me?
Yes, we've only got 2 minutes left, so can it be sort of just a
Okay.
very, very brief answer? Thank you.
Okay, I take the case of Morocco, of course, briefly speaking. So we don't feel we don't feel at all this distinction between people, the followers of religions, because of the status of the commander of the believers, all the believers. So they are protected,
Yes.
and there's no room for
right.
distinction when it comes to giving help or helping
Right.
people. No, we don't establish
Right.
these.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Musoma?
In our situation, government took over the provision of food supplies because government felt it is important to do this for everybody, because each and every person needed to benefit from this. And secondly, government gave each an unemployed person for 6 months 350 rand for survival. So we have got a huge number of people who are unemployed. Government decided you are going to give a stipend for 350, at least so that you can make do in your own environment. And government established what we call solidarity fund. So fund for purposes of helping communities was then channeled into this common fund called solidarity fund, so that you have no situation of discriminating
Yes.
against people along the religious lines or cultural or linguistic lines.
Right. Thank you. And I'd like to draw just to close on what Dr. Garba said about how many Nigerians, religious leaders and practitioners become aware of the significance of modern media in communicating with their communities. So I think that's also an area that will be interesting to watch for as we look at religious and state and religion and law in terms of the wider landscapes, either nationally or regionally or internationally. The impact of the media, both, which of course is both positive and negative always, but I think the areas that we've talked about today, Morocco and Nigeria and South Africa, are going to be exemplary in that regard. So I'm afraid that we have to draw this webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our 3 speakers, Dr. Hajji, Dr. Garba, Professor Musoma, for participating today and sharing with us some very important reflections and information findings on this vast and ever-changing topic. Thank you. I'll hand over to Francesco.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Hackett, and all of the speakers. Thank you for being with us today. And let's give a virtual round of applause to our panel and the hosts who made this panel possible. It has been a very interesting discussion, and I would like to thank again our chair and panelists for their contributions. Thank you to the participants, for all of you for joining us from many places. We appreciate your engagement and participation. I'm now happy to announce our next webinar. Registration on our landing page will open soon for episode 12 next week, 25th of June at 3 p.m. Brussels time. This webinar will focus on the contribution of faith-based humanitarian organizations and their approaches to tackle the various dimensions of the pandemic. We will be pleased to have representatives from the United Nations, Georgetown University, and the presidents of Latter-day Saints Charities and the community of Sant'Egidio. We invite you to keep an eye on our landing page, or if you have given us permission to send you emails, look for the upcoming invitations for more details. Although we cannot see you, we appreciate your support throughout the series, and we look forward to welcoming you next Thursday.